Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me talking to you today. My name is Oren Gerstein. I'm an Israeli, the CEO and founder of IdealityRoads. IdealityRoads work with government around the world, enable them to develop innovation ecosystem by using the policies, the lesson learned, and the tools of the Israeli high-tech transformation in order to utilize knowledge economy. I will take you through a discussion about the development of the Israeli ecosystem, talk in a glance about the challenges of tech transformation and commercializations from universities and research centers. When you are using raw material and energy, you have less of them. When you are using knowledge, you have more of it. This is the essence of what knowledge economy is all about. Israel started this journey only 3 decades ago. Mid-80s, the country is suffering from hyperinflation of 450% a year, and that was the changing point. Today, Israel is first in the world in startup companies per capita, with venture capital investment per capita. In the percentage of research and development out of the GDP, just third after the US and China, with number of companies listed on the NASDAQ, and with a long list of multinational R&D in the States of Israel. Venture capital investment per capita, Israel is about twice as much as the US and about 20 times more than Europe and China altogether. Research and development out of the GDP, the percentage of research and development out of the GDP. Israel is leading this index in the last 2 decades. That symbolizes the amount of money which is expended on research and development, not invested, but expended in research and development out of the GDP. In 2016, that was around $13 billion. This index is growing since 1995. The most amazing things about this index is that 86% of the expenditures are private sector, while half of that, it's not even Israeli money. It's foreign venture capital and multinational that putting their R&D centers in the States of Israel. Data from 2015. Israel is exporting knowledge in around $23 billion in 2017. The idea around exporting knowledge is taking an idea, an invention, development that was, or research that was done in a university, package that within a legal entity, developing that and sell it to a third party, taking the money and reinvest. That's what exporting knowledge is all about. That takes place in dozens of occasions every year. That changing between tens of millions to hundreds of millions. And there are even billions of deals. 2017, Intel wrote a check of $15.3 billion on a company that originally developed from the Hebrew University, idea that was invested and researched and been developed from the Hebrew University. 2018, already 2 deals of mega exits took place up to now. The ecosystem is very diverse. It's not one sector. It's built out of semiconductors and life science and IT and communications and internet and agri-tech and so on and so forth. That symbolize the strengths of the ecosystem in Israel. This is the structure of the ecosystem itself. We do not have the time to analyze the entire element, but 2 main lessons that we need to take out of that. First, it's a dynamic ecosystem that's changing and needed to create the right policies and adopt into new changes. The ecosystem cannot work in small scales. You need to create a critical mass, and you need to create a critical mass in a short period of time. Last but not least, the ecosystem cannot be shut down. If the ecosystem will be shut down in time of crisis, it will be either impossible or very expensive to restart it from the beginning. And I'm saying that because the state of Israel, or the government of the state of Israel, supporting the ecosystem by research and development grant, as we are going to talk about it, in the last two well-known crises, September 2000, when the internet bubble was burst, and the financial crisis, the state in 2008. Israel is a tiny country located in a place where, from political reasons which are not really important right now, we cannot trade with our neighbors. Therefore, Israeli entrepreneurs developed a strategy and a practices to be global from day one, meaning going directly to the US, directly to Europe, directly to China, India, in Latin America. One of the elements that enable that is using all kinds of practices in between the using of intellectual property, patents. This is where I'm gonna do the first stops and have a short discussion about the current situation within Uruguay. The numbers of granted patents in Uruguay since 1999 to 2019 is very, very, very small, represented in the yellow bars. Very interesting, most of the patents that been registered in Uruguay is been done by non-residents, non-Uruguayan residents. The numbers of Uruguayan residents that writing IP is tiny comparing to the non-residents. It's very diverse, which symbolizes against the strengths of the ecosystem. It's supporting civil engineering and pharma and biotechnologies and food and mechanical elements. But when we are measuring the renewed patents or abandoned patents, once they are already been granted, we can see that the percentage of abandoned patents is very, very high. Probably one of the reasons for the current situation is lack of awareness to the importance of using IP. And the second thing might be the lack of maturity of the ecosystem that cannot support this type of activity. That should not be done by universities. That should be done by the private sector, which have the resources and the capacity to manage those processes that are very expensive. The issue of culture to the creation of an ecosystem is highly important. Well, entrepreneurship is something that's been taught in high schools and universities in Israel. There is a lot of conferences in Israel about high-tech. Almost every week that you will come to Israel, there will be a conference on high-tech. To be an entrepreneur in Israel is a very, very respectable status, but probably one of the important elements is the fact that Israelis are embracing failure, not incentivize failures, but embracing failures. And by the well-known statement of Albert Einstein, anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. Well, with regard to the multinationals, we have stated at the beginning of this discussion there are about 360 multinationals R&D centers in Israel, not comparable to any other nations in the world, and for sure not in the scale of the Israeli economy, which is in some sense similar to the Uruguayan one, which considered to be, both of them considered to be small economies. Well, since 1949 to around end of the 80s, there was only three main players, IBM, Motorola, and Intel, that put their R&D centers in Israel. And then since mid-70s until beginning of the 90s, nothing has happened. But then, since the beginning of the 90s, more than 360 multinational companies opened their R&D centers in the state of Israel. And you can see huge corporates like Google, Samsung, Intel, Huawei, Nestle, again, very diverse verticals and in industries. The reason that those multinationals open their R&D centers in Israel is first because they have saw opportunities in which they have purchased those opportunities. Then once they're becoming a few of them, they needed to manage this type of activities. And the second reason is that some of them identified their competitors located in Israel and cannot allow themselves not to be with an R&D centers in Israel, therefore open one as well. Academia. The academia, above all government subsidies, is generated about $750 million every year by commercializing innovation and IP, intellectual property, that was developed within the academia. The academia in Israel is among the highest numbers of patent and academic papers per capita. Highly efficient TTO. TTOs are the Technology Transfer Office or Technology Transfer Companies that's responsible for the commercialization of the invention that is being done in the university, and highly awarded as commercialization among researchers, meaning that the researchers are highly incentivized to commercialize their idea. And commercialize is not publish. One of the elements of commercialization is publish, but in a very unique way. We are going to talk about that in a second. IP income as a percentage of the research and development expenditures, comparing to US, UK, and Australia, Israel is the highest and highest by factors between those companies. The efficiency of the TTOs, if we are measuring the numbers of headcounts per TTO, the average number of headcounts, we can see Israel achieving highest results with the lowest number of headcount per TTO units. The Israeli innovation cycle is very simple. Government is raining grant, supporting program all year long, but those are not R&D grants. Those are unique grants that bases on public-private partnership. Running those grants enable the creation of startup companies, multinational companies, research centers, and collecting its benefits through exit taxes, royalties, and a lot of foreign investment has been mentioned earlier. The unique way that the state of Israel is managing its R&D grant is by using a public-private partnership that's today managing by the Israeli Innovation Authority, which used to be managed under the Ministry of Economy until 4 years ago by the chief scientist. Well, the chief scientist just shift to manage the Israeli Innovation Authority, which is a semi-government agency. The unique way about the grant system is that for an early stage, the most risky companies, the proportions of participations from the public sector is the highest, can get up to 90%. And when risk has been reduced, government participation is reducing its participation, and so on and so forth. When we are looking on the division of the entire budget, which is around $350 million annually, we can see that the early stage is the lowest amount of money that's been allocated within this budget, while the largest amount is being dedicated to large and solid corporations. One of the examples for those public-private partnerships is the Technology Incubator Program. Well, the idea of this program that it's time to deal with a market failure. And the market failure is that there are good ideas which are too early and too risky for the privates to invest. Early stage, high risk innovation technology that enterprise cannot raise money from private sector. So government has set this policy that's supporting about 600,000 per investment, a significant amount of money, give them a runway of about 2 years, while government investing about 85% of each one of those investments, and the private sector required to invest the complementary 15% only. Well, those grants will be paid success-based only, no free meal in Israel. If you succeed, paid back by royalties, 3% a year. If you haven't succeeded, nothing has happened, no lien, no liabilities, and that incentivize entrepreneurs to try again and again if they have failed. Well, going back to the program, 85% of each one of the investment, each one of the average $600,000 that will be invested in those companies will be given by the public sector, while only 15 will be given by the private sector. It's managing in a way that the private sector getting a franchise for 8 years to manage a tech incubators, and they are the only one that are allowed to ask for those grants. There are about 18 of them in Israel. 17 which are regular, and one which is a biotechnology tech incubator that investing about $2 million per company as opposed to 600,000. And one of the reasons for that is that biotech companies require different types of runway and resources to achieve their goals, which is reducing risk and enabling achieving a significant milestone for the next finance round that will be invested by the private sector. Well, in time that the founders and the private sector, the tech incubators, will have equity, government equity shares is zero. Government do not managing equity. Government is managing the policies. Government is managing the strategy in letting the private sector managing those companies. Looking at the result of this program only, and this program is one out of 40 programs that is been managing by the Israeli Innovation Authority. We can see that since 1999 until 2013, the state of Israel, which representing by the black line, invested about $50 million annually, which aimed to get to around $600 million. At the same time, those companies that was establishing the technology incubator program has raised about $5 billion. Well, the state of Israel is not a venture capital and should not play as a venture capital. But if the state of Israel would be a venture capital, they would have done 5 to 6 times on their investment, which is an amazing result comparing to any venture capital around the world. Well, the program established more than 2,000 companies. Those companies raised about $5 million, representing about 5 to 6 time on the investment. And the success rate of those companies are very high, mainly due to the fact that government do not pick winners. Government do not involve in managing those companies. Government let the private sector managing those companies. Can the lessons of the Israeli innovation success be copied? Well, the answer, if we are trying to do a blueprint or to copy the same environment, the answer is no. There are dozens of delegations that coming to Israel every year and trying to learn the lessons of the Israeli ecosystem, and they are failing one after the other. I want to share with you 2 success stories which we at Ideality work with, and the secret is by the fact that we have analyzed the entire elements that enable the creation of the ecosystem and making the adjustment to each one of the territories that we are working within. Adjustments to legal, to cultures, and other risks. The first one is New Zealand. IdealityRoads work with the New Zealand government in the last 5 years. We have built a technology incubator program, a national technology incubator program in New Zealand. They are the first government ever succeeded to build this kind of program similar to or based on the Israeli experience, considered to be a huge success. The New Zealand government invested like $50 million in the last 5 years, and 2020 are about to extend this activity due to its success. They have created more than 40 companies that would not be created in any other way without this kind of initiative. And most of them come from the academia. The other example is CITES. CITES is the first Latin American Israeli-style technology incubator or an early stage venture capital. CITES is owned by Grupo Sanco Seguros and was established about 5 years ago. IdealityRoads work with CITES in the last 4 years on ground. And CITES today is managing about $30 million fund of aim to invest in early stage venture capital, which are based on basic science and applicable science. The only one in Latin America not comparable to any other early stage venture capital, which was acknowledged by the Inter-Latin American Developing Bank, that decided to invest in this fund just lately. And they are active in Latin America since 1996 and invested in more than 75 companies. CITES has won a franchise to manage a technology incubator or a scientific accelerator, as been stated in Argentina, and got a grant of $6 million from the federal government in Buenos Aires. CITES is one of the amazing examples to the importance of what soft skills are. CITES has succeeded to build in the last 4 years capabilities which are based mainly on soft skills that was earned by a very talented team, and that they have succeeded to show that knowledge economy can be created, and Latin America is a place that can benefit from those kind of processes and practices and utilize knowledge economy. A few words about tech transfer and commercializations. Well, commercialization is the combinations of IP licensing and research services. And why to focus on licensing? Well, commercialization is the combinations of both of them. The important thing is the understanding about the metrics in between the two elements. Licensing is enable scalable growth of income, and it enable a passive income that could flow into universities, research centers, and increasing the amount of research that is being done within those universities, as opposed to services that are limited by the amount of researchers and the amount of hours that those researchers could allocate for research or for services within the research and development activity. In Israel, in 2014, about 75% of the income, which turned into a total of almost $750 million, was from IP licensing, and only 25% was from research services that have been given by the academia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, order is matter. Universities and research centers and researchers generally are being granted by publications, and they're getting their awarenesses and by publish their research. Well, once you have published a research, once you have published an invention without protecting this invention, it's becoming a public domain, and the economical value of these inventions is zero at this point. But if you only protect the IP before you are publishing, then you will have the opportunity to commercialize it and to create an economical benefits for the institute, for the researchers, for the labs, and of course, for the nation that subsidize in most of the countries around the world the academic activity. Well, in Israel, researchers are highly incentivized to commercialize their idea. And the reason is that the contribution that's coming out of commercialization is divided like 1/3 between the university, the researchers, and the labs, or 40-40-80, which is a common practice in many countries around the world. So from every dollar, about 1/3 will go to the university, 1/3 will go to the researcher himself, and there are researchers that consider to be a serial entrepreneurial researchers, and to the labs that enable the labs to continue the research and creating new research from those resources. And those resources can get into tens of millions per invention. Well, the skills needed to launch and managing a tech-based startup is not like doing a research. Therefore, in Israel, besides every universities, there is a TTO or TTC, a technology transfer company or technology transfer office, that they're responsible to commercialize their IP and let the private sector deal with startup research and development and company manage, and not led that by researchers. The tech transfer process, it's a way, a practices that in a non-rational way, disconnecting the dependency of the startup companies from the lab. And that in order to, in the process of research and development, stopping the R and moving toward the D, which is engineering and commercializations and creating business around this idea, and not mandatory continue into a depth research, like probably what researchers would aim to do. But with those resources that have been created from the company, then the company could continue to develop the next generation and the third generations of product research and so on and so forth. So the cycle is starting from a research, then discovery that done by the TTO, identifying this invention, doing an evaluation to those inventions, because there are many of them and you cannot protect all of them. Then in the relevant cases, create an IP protection, getting into a process of business development in order to license these inventions into the private sector, and then the commercialization agreement that's been signed between the academia and the private sector, and then letting the private sector leading the management of those startup companies and continue to the next invention. Well, we should all remember that that ideas which are not being commercialized not worth much after a year on the shelf if they are comparing to a milk. Because invention do have their lifetime. Therefore, it's highly important for TTO, technology transfer offices or companies, to understand that keeping the invention to themselves without commercializing that to the public sector eventually would lead to a worse of those IPs into something close to zero. Well, going back to the general structure of public-private partnership, we have mentioned that many governments trying to create a public-private partnership within the research and development vertical. Well, public-private partnership is something that's been used all around the world for many large infrastructure projects. When that's coming to a research and development vertical, the element of the risk and many other complexity which related to risk and culture are causing government to fail. And the detail and the devil's in the fine details with regard to that. For sure, we can say that public-private partnership within innovation is the fastest possible economical growth engine in the world, comparing to Formula One. Only if you know how to drive it, because if you don't, then you will crash into the wall. And this is not about the drivers. This is not just about the private sector. This is about the combinations between public sector and private sector. When the private sector is being played by the drivers and the public sector is being played by the teams that supporting those kinds of groups. Highly important to remember that developing an IT ecosystem is not a spontaneous process. It is government responsibility. There is no evidence, no whatsoever, in any other place around the world that any IT ecosystem was developing by itself without a government support. It's not. There is no evidence. And sustaining an IT ecosystem is not an automatic process. It is government responsibility. And again, going back to the Israeli case study and the two last worldwide crises, September 2000 and August 2008, the state of Israel continued to invest like nothing has happened and enable the entire IT ecosystem to cross those two crises. Ladies and gentlemen, there are things in life we cannot achieve in small incremental steps. We cannot cross a chasm in 2 steps. Gravity will make it force and it will fall down. The same applies for creating an IT ecosystem. It cannot be done in small steps. The government should set a policy, make sure that all the ingredients are in the right place, all the policies that's supporting the entire life cycle of companies from an IP to an IPO. And again, in Israel, there are about 40 of them. Doesn't say that you guys should have 40 of them at the first steps, but the policy and the understanding how this journey of utilizing knowledge economy is all about is something that better to be earned before getting into this adventures and journey. Once you have it all in the right place, ignite it and continue to support that. It's been a great pleasure talking to you today. Muchas gracias.